The moon, a pale, watchful eye in the velvet sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the ancient forest floor. Each breath Ira drew was a shallow gasp, tasting of pine needles, damp earth, and the lingering metallic tang of fear that clung to her like a shroud. Her muscles screamed, protesting the relentless flight, but her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of urgency that drowned out the rustling leaves and the distant, imagined howls of pursuit. She wasn't running from a physical threat, not yet, but from a phantom limb of expectation, from the echo of a bond that had promised protection but delivered only gilded chains. Alpha King Calder Ashwin's face, etched with a cold fury, flashed in her mind, a ghost she couldn't outrun, even though every fiber of her being urged her forward, deeper into the unknown. The freedom she'd grasped was a fragile, terrifying thing, a wilderness where she was truly alone for the first time, without a pack, without a purpose prescribed by others. But the silence she sought was proving to be a deception, a different kind of pressure that settled on her shoulders, heavier than any duty. Tonight, the silence would break, for better or worse. She stumbled, her worn boots catching on a gnarled root, sending a jarring pain through her ankle. A choked cry escaped her lips, quickly stifled. Sound was danger. Sound was a beacon. She pushed herself up, wincing, her gaze darting through the trees. The forest was alive with unseen things, but the greatest threat was the one she carried within her. The memory of how easily she'd been broken, how readily she'd once bowed. Calder's pack had marked her not with a bite, but with a gaze that stripped her bare, a constant reminder of her supposed deficiencies, her lack of a strong wolf, her inability to bear heirs. To them, she was an empty vessel, a broken promise. To herself, she was a survivor, albeit a damaged one, still reeling from the public humiliation of her rejection, the whispers of wolfless Omega, echoing in her mind even out here, in the quiet solitude of the wild. For weeks she had wandered, a ghost among the trees, surviving on instinct and the meager skills she'd honed in secret. She'd expected to find another power, another alpha who would demand submission, another set of rules to navigate. That was the only reality she knew. Her life had always been a series of obligations, of roles she was expected to fill and then inevitably fail. First as a potential mate, then as a disgraced Omega, finally as an exile. The idea of existing outside those parameters was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was like learning to breathe a new kind of air, one that simultaneously clarified and disoriented her senses. She had been born into a world where every female's worth was measured by the strength of her wolf and the promise of her womb. Ira had been found wanting on both counts, a defect in a lineage meant for power. The shame had been a constant companion, a heavy cloak she'd worn even when no one else was around to see. But then she had stumbled into his territory, a vast expanse of untamed wilderness that hummed with a different kind of power. Marek Solon. The name was whispered in hushed tones even among the few rogues she'd cautiously encountered. A phantom, a legend, a force to be avoided. He was an alpha, yes, but one who existed outside the traditional structures, a solitary king of his own making, rumored to be as ancient as the mountains themselves. His power so immense it could shatter lesser wills. She had first seen him at the edge of a rushing river, a figure of imposing stature, his broad shoulders outlined against the setting sun. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, fell past his shoulders, framing a face that was rugged, scarred, and yet held an unexpected depth. He was carving a piece of wood, his hands surprisingly deft for a man of such evident strength, shaping it with a meticulous patience that belied his formidable aura. There was a primal intensity to him, an ancient quietness that spoke of deep roots and solitary wisdom. He hadn't snarled, he hadn't demanded, he hadn't even looked at her with the possessive hunger that was so common among dominant males, the kind that made her skin crawl and her hackles rise. Instead, his gaze had been assessing, distant, almost curious. He'd merely nodded towards the small, rough cabin nestled in a clearing nearby, a silent invitation, then returned to his carving, as if her appearance was a mundane occurrence, not the arrival of a trespasser. That was weeks ago. Weeks of shared silence. Weeks of him leaving portions of freshly hunted game outside her temporary lean-to, never asking for anything in return. Weeks of him repairing a loose shingle on her makeshift shelter without comment. Weeks of her watching him from afar, trying to decipher the unwritten rules of his world, only to find there were none. He simply was. And in his presence, she simply was allowed to be. This lack of demand, this absence of expectation, was more unsettling than any threat. It was a void she didn't know how to fill. A battleground where her usual weapons of defiance were useless. She had spent her life bracing for impact, for the next blow, the next demand, the next rejection. Here, there was only stillness. Tonight, the quiet was a torment. It was too vast, too empty, reflecting the cavernous space within her that Calder's cruelties had carved out. She craved confrontation, a line to push against, a challenge to prove her worth. His lack of demands was disarming, unnerving. It left her with nothing to fight, no external enemy to distract her from the internal war she waged with herself. Was this freedom, or was it just a more sophisticated cage, one where she was left to self-destruct? The shame of her past, the hollow echo of Calder's words, still resonated in her bones, a phantom ache that no amount of physical distance could truly silence. Her ankle throbbed, a dull ache that grounded her in the present. She needed to find a more secure shelter, away from the looming threat of the coming dawn and the possibility of discovery. The moon was sinking, and the air grew colder, sharp with the promise of frost. She pushed through a thicket of thorny bushes, her clothes snagging, her skin pricking. The scent hit her then, pine, damp earth, but also something else, something distinctly him. A musky, wild scent that spoke of deep forest and raw power, an undertone of smoke and something indefinable, like ancient stone, primordial and grounding. It was Marek. He was close, too close, panic flared, primal and immediate. Had he been following her, watching? Was this the moment the other shoe dropped, the moment the demand came, the possessive claim she'd been dreading but also perversely expecting? She froze, her heart leaping into her throat, ready to bolt, ready to fight, ready to surrender. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to disappear into the impenetrable darkness of the woods, to maintain the illusion of control she so desperately clung to. But she didn't move. A different emotion, one she hadn't recognized in years, flickered to life: curiosity, a strange magnetic pull that urged her to stay, to understand. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes scanning the shadows. He was there, a silent sentinel, standing beneath the colossal branches of an ancient oak. His eyes, in the dim light, glowed with an amber intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. He wasn't moving towards her, not advancing. He was simply watching. His face, usually a stoic mask, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Concern? Understanding? Or was it merely the predator observing his prey, waiting for the opportune moment to strike? "You're hurt," he said, his voice a low rumble, breaking the profound silence of the forest. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. There was no accusation, no demand, only an observation, laced with a surprising warmth that sent a shiver down her spine. Ira flinched, startled by the sound of his voice, by its unexpected gentleness. She hadn't heard him speak more than a handful of words in weeks. "It's nothing," she managed, her own voice a rusty whisper, unused to conversation, rough from disuse and the cold night air. He took a slow step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. Each movement was fluid, powerful like a predator in its prime, yet without aggression. His scent intensified, wrapping around her, a heady mix of safety and danger, a scent that resonated deep within her, stirring something long dormant. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough for her to see the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, a jagged line that spoke of violence and survival, a testament to battles fought and won. "You should rest," he said, his gaze dropping to her injured ankle. He didn't offer a hand, didn't make a move to touch her. He simply stood there, a silent presence, offering space, not possession. He offered a choice, an autonomy she wasn't accustomed to. The lack of pressure was overwhelming. It chipped away at her carefully constructed walls, leaving her exposed, vulnerable. She wanted to lash out, to scream, to demand that he make a move, any move, that would allow her to fall back into the familiar patterns of defiance and self-preservation. But he offered nothing to defy, only a quiet, unwavering presence that mirrored the stillness of the ancient forest. "Why?" she asked, the single word hoarse, raw, torn from the deepest part of her being. "Why do you— nothing?" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the weeks of unspoken care, the absence of demands, the unsettling freedom. Marek's eyes, those molten amber pools, held hers. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that was surprisingly gentle for such a formidable man, a subtle shift that softened his rugged features. "Because," he rumbled, the sound vibrating in the air between them, resonating through her very bones. "You already carry enough weight." His words struck her like a physical blow, stripping away her defenses, exposing the raw, aching core of her loneliness, her shame, her silent battles. He saw it. He understood it. And he offered no solution, no claim, no duty, only a quiet acknowledgement of her burden. The air crackled, charged with an unspoken tension, a primal current that flowed between them, a recognition of something deeper than words. He closed the remaining distance, not to touch her, but to simply stand beside her, gazing out into the moonlit forest, as if he saw something she couldn't. A secret shared only with the ancient trees. Then his hand, large and calloused, moved. Not towards her, but to the gnarled root that had tripped her. He knelt, his movements surprisingly agile for his size, and with a quiet grunt, began to pull it from the earth, clearing the path. It was an act of unexpected care, a silent gesture that spoke volumes, a profound intimacy in its simplicity. Ira watched him, her heart thrumming, a new kind of fear, a new kind of hope, blossoming in her chest. This was not the betrayal she knew. This was something else entirely. As he worked, a soft light seemed to emanate from the ground near his hand, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shimmer that caught her eye, a faint, silvery pulse that seemed to merge with the moonlight. But before she could question it, it was gone, leaving only the dark earth and the deep, unsettling quiet of the woods, and the lingering question of what she had just witnessed. The silvery shimmer, fleeting as a breath on a cold windowpane, vanished as Marek straightened, leaving Ira with the unsettling sensation that she had glimpsed something profound, something beyond the natural world. Her heart, already a frantic drum, now hammered with a different rhythm, one of bewildered awe. He hadn't noticed her gaze, or if he had, he gave no sign. The gnarled root was gone, tossed aside, leaving a cleared path, a small, quiet act of protection that resonated louder than any grand declaration. The silence that followed was thick, pregnant with unspoken things. "Come," Marek rumbled, his voice low, a deep vibration that seemed to travel through the damp earth beneath her feet. He didn't wait for her, simply turned and began to walk, his powerful stride unhurried, yet purposeful. He led her not back towards the crude lean-to she had called home for weeks, nor towards his own cabin, but deeper into a dense grove of ancient pines where the moonlight struggled to penetrate. Each step was a quiet protest from her throbbing ankle, but a strange, compelling pull drew her forward, a thread of something primal connecting her to his retreating form. The air grew colder, but his scent, wild and earthy, was a constant, almost tangible presence, a beacon in the encroaching gloom. She followed, her gaze fixed on the broad expanse of his back, the way his muscles flexed beneath the worn fabric of his tunic. He moved with a silent grace that spoke of a deep communion with the forest, a true creature of the wild. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile this image with the predatory alpha she had always been taught to fear. Calder's presence had been all sharp edges, demanding attention, radiating a cold authority that left no room for doubt or dissent. Marek was different. He was a force of nature, yes, but one that seemed to invite, rather than compel. It was a distinction that baffled and terrified her in equal measure. They reached a hidden alcove, a natural cave tucked into a rocky outcrop, almost entirely concealed by thick ivy and fallen branches. A small, carefully tended fire glowed within, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The air inside was surprisingly warm, scented with pine smoke and the lingering aroma of herbs. He gestured towards a bed of furs laid out near the fire, a silent command that was more invitation than order. Ira hesitated at the mouth of the cave. Her instincts screamed caution, urged her to maintain distance, to protect the fragile shell of herself she had painstakingly rebuilt. Yet the warmth of the fire, the promise of rest, and the quiet strength emanating from Marek were an irresistible draw. She hobbled inside, collapsing onto the furs with a soft sigh of relief, the tension in her body slowly beginning to uncoil. Marek knelt before her, his large frame momentarily eclipsing the firelight. He reached for her ankle, his movements deliberate, his calloused fingers brushing lightly against her skin. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through her, not of pain, but of a strange electric current that radiated through her entire limb. She gasped, pulling back slightly, her eyes wide with alarm. He paused, his amber gaze meeting hers, a silent question in their depths. There was no judgment, no impatience, only a quiet understanding. "It's sprained," he stated, his voice a low thrum. "Not broken. But it needs care." He didn't ask permission. He didn't demand compliance. He simply waited, his hand poised, offering a silent choice. Ira's breath hitched. This was the moment she had to decide if she could trust him, if she could allow herself to be vulnerable in the presence of an alpha. After all the betrayals she had endured, Calder had often used touch as a means of control, a reminder of her inferiority, a subtle assertion of his dominance. Marek's touch, even nascent, felt different. It felt clean, unburdened. Slowly, hesitantly, Ira nodded, her gaze locked with his. "All right," she whispered, the word barely audible. He resumed his task, his touch surprisingly gentle, almost reverent, as he carefully palpated her ankle. She watched his hands, strong and scarred, yet moving with a delicate precision. His proximity was overwhelming. His scent, a rich tapestry of earth, smoke, and primal male, filled her senses, seeping into her very bones, a deeply unsettling yet oddly comforting presence. It was a scent that whispered of ancient forests, of untamed power, of a wildness that mirrored the deepest parts of her own suppressed nature. Her dormant wolf, a shadowy, whimpering thing that had long since retreated into the darkest corners of her psyche, stirred, a faint tremor of recognition. He produced a small pouch from his belt, its contents smelling faintly of mint and other unknown herbs. He crushed them between his fingers, mixing them with a paste from a small wooden pot, then began to apply the cool, pungent poultice to her swollen ankle. The herbal balm brought immediate relief, a soothing counterpoint to the throbbing pain. "Calder," she began, the name escaping her lips before she could stop it. The bitterness of it tasted like ash. "He said I was barren, wolfless." The words were a confession, dragged from the depths of her shame, offered to the quiet man who asked nothing. She expected a dismissive grunt, a knowing nod, a confirmation of her brokenness. Marek's hands paused their work. He looked up, his amber eyes piercing through her defenses, seeing past the scars and the shame, straight into the aching vulnerability of her soul. "Words are just sounds, Ira," he said, his voice softer now, a deep murmur that resonated with conviction. "They only carry weight if you allow them to." He resumed applying the poultice, his touch still gentle, but with new, subtle intensity. "Your truth is your own." His words, simple yet profound, struck her with the force of a physical blow. Your truth is your own. No one had ever said that to her. Her truth had always been defined by others, by the expectations of the pack, by Calder's cold decrees. The sheer, unburdened acceptance in his gaze was a revelation, a mirror reflecting a possibility she hadn't dared to imagine. That she wasn't broken, merely misplaced. A tear, hot and unexpected, tracked a path down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away, embarrassed. He finished wrapping her ankle with strips of clean linen, his movements efficient and practiced. Then he rose, moving to the mouth of the cave and gazing out into the moonlit forest. The silence stretched between them once more, but this time it was different. It wasn't the empty, tormenting silence of her solitary flight, nor the tense, expectant silence of Calder's court. It was a full silence, rich with presence, with unspoken understanding. Ira watched him, her mind swirling. He didn't turn to her, didn't press for further confession, didn't demand gratitude. He simply stood there, a guardian at the threshold, his immense form silhouetted against the night. The thought struck her then with a terrifying clarity. He was giving her space, not because he was indifferent, but because he implicitly understood that her greatest need was to claim her own autonomy. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a broken omega, but as a being with an inherent right to choose. As the warmth of the fire slowly lulled her body, her mind remained hyper-alert, trying to process this new reality. Safety without ownership. The concept was still alien, unsettling. It meant she had to trust herself, trust her own judgment, something she had learned not to do. Calder had trained her to be dependent, to crave external validation, even if it came in the form of harsh discipline. Marek offered none of that. He offered a terrifying, beautiful blank slate. A subtle change in the night air drew her attention. A low, mournful howl echoed in the distance, closer than she would have liked, carrying on the cold wind. It was not the familiar communal howl of a pack, but something else. A lone, hungry cry that spoke of desperation and danger. Marek's shoulders subtly tensed, his head tilted, listening. His scent, which had been a comforting anchor, now sharpened, carrying an edge of primal alertness. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over her, a flicker of something new in his amber eyes, a protective intensity that sent a fresh jolt through her. It was possessive, yes, but not in the way Calder's had been. It was the fierce, ancient protectiveness of a guardian, not the grasping hunger of an owner. He moved back to the fire, picking up a long, gnarled stick, its tip hardened by flame, and began to poke at the embers, sending sparks dancing into the dark air. "This territory," he said, his voice a low growl, "is not always quiet." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The distant howl, the subtle shift in his demeanor, spoke volumes. The quiet, unsettling freedom she had found here was not absolute. There were still dangers in the wild, dangers that even a solitary alpha like Marek had to contend with. And perhaps, dangers that followed a runaway omega. As the firelight flickered across his rugged face, Ira noticed something else, something she hadn't seen before. Beneath the scar on his brow, faintly, almost imperceptibly, a pattern of intricate lines seemed to pulse with a faint internal light, like glowing veins beneath his skin. It was the same silvery shimmer she'd seen near his hand earlier, only now it was on him, deeply embedded. It pulsed once, twice, then faded back into the shadows of his skin, leaving her with a chilling question. Was Marek more than just a rogue alpha? Was he something ancient, something touched by magic? Something even more powerful and enigmatic than she could possibly imagine? And what did that make her, lying vulnerable in his care, at the mercy of his unspoken intentions? The thought sent a shiver through her, a mix of profound fear and an inexplicable, desperate hope. The silvery pulse beneath Marek's skin, a fleeting, almost impossible vision, vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Ira to question if her mind, frayed by fear and exhaustion, had simply conjured it. But the image lingered, a chilling testament to his profound otherness. The distant howl cut through the night again, closer this time, a raw, guttural cry that spoke less of a wolf and more of a creature consumed by primal hunger and desperation. It was a sound that scraped against the edges of Ira's own suppressed wolf, a faint, almost forgotten tremor deep within her core. Marek stood by the cave mouth, a silent colossus, his broad shoulders squared, his senses acutely attuned to the shifting currents of the forest. The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with a latent power, a quiet storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. His scent, which had been a comforting anchor moments before, now carried an edge of sharpened vigilance, a musk of ancient protection. He didn't turn to her, but his presence filled the small cave, a living shield against the unseen threats lurking in the darkness. Ira pushed herself further onto the furs, trying to quell the tremor in her hands. The herbal poultice on her ankle provided a physical balm, but her mind raced, grappling with the implications of what she had seen and heard. The world she knew, ruled by pack laws and alpha dominance, was rigid, brutal, but at least understandable. This wilderness, and the enigmatic alpha who guarded it, defied all her preconceived notions. She had fled a gilded cage, only to find herself in a wilder, more profound mystery. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath, fearing the answer. Marek's head tilted slightly, his profile stark against the dimly lit mouth of the cave. "A rogue," he rumbled, his voice low, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate with the very earth. "Lost, hungry, driven by despair." His tone was devoid of judgment, merely an observation, but the underlying current of grim understanding was palpable. It wasn't just a wolf. It was a soul in anguish, stripped bare of its humanity, consumed by its primal urges. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, a knot forming in her stomach. The rogues she'd encountered on her journey had been wary, solitary creatures, but this howl spoke of something far more feral, far less rational. He finally turned, his amber eyes meeting hers across the flickering firelight. In their depths, she saw not just vigilance, but a profound, ancient weariness, as if he carried the weight of every lost soul in the forest. "All things desperate are dangerous, Ira," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But not all danger is born of malice." His words were a riddle, a paradox that echoed the conflicting emotions swirling within her. He moved away from the cave mouth, drawing deeper into the shelter, but not towards her. Instead, he sat cross-legged near the fire, his immense frame radiating a quiet strength. He picked up another piece of wood, a gnarled branch, and began to whittle it with a small, sharp knife, his hands moving with the same deliberate precision she had observed by the river. The rhythmic scrape of the knife against the wood filled the silence, a grounding sound amidst the rising tension. Ira watched him, captivated. His focused intensity, even in the face of potential threat, was unnerving. Calder would have been barking orders, strategizing, asserting his dominance. Marek simply was. This lack of overt control, this refusal to define her role or demand her obedience, was both liberating and terrifying. It meant she had to choose moment by moment how to exist in his presence, and the choice was always to stay. "You said, 'My truth is my own,'" she ventured, her voice soft, fragile. She needed to understand, to peel back the layers of her own conditioning. But Calder, he made it my truth, that I was nothing, a burden. The memory of his cold eyes, his dismissive hand gestures, the collective gaze of the pack that had stripped her of dignity, still clawed at her. The humiliation had been a branding iron, scarring her deeper than any physical wound. Marek stopped carving, his gaze lifting to meet hers. The firelight played across his rugged features, highlighting the deep lines etched around his eyes. "He made you believe his truth was yours," he corrected, his voice a low, steady current. "There is a difference, a profound one." He paused, then continued, his words slow, deliberate, each one infused with a quiet power. "His pack judged you by their measure, their needs, their limitations, not by what you are inherently." His words resonated in her chest, stirring a long dormant ember of defiance. "Not by what you are inherently." What was she, inherently? Stripped of the titles, the expectations, the failures, what remained? A flicker of her suppressed wolf, a fleeting spark of raw instinct, seemed to rise, whimpering, within her. It was a tentative awakening, a fragile protest against the years of repression. I don't know what I am," she admitted, the confession raw and vulnerable. "My wolf, it's weak, or silent. It never came, not like theirs did, not fully." The shame burned, a familiar heat spreading through her cheeks. This was the core of her perceived brokenness, the reason for Calder's rejection. Marek's eyes, those molten amber pools, softened imperceptibly. He reached out, not to touch her, but to toss another small log onto the fire. The flames leaped, casting brighter light into the cave. "Strength is not always a roar, Ira," he said, his voice a balm. "Sometimes it is the stillness, the endurance, the silent refusal to break." His gaze returned to hers, deep and unwavering. "Your wolf may be quiet, but it led you here. It chose freedom. That is a strength many alphas, even kings, do not possess." His words were a revelation, a shattering of the old narrative. He wasn't looking for a fierce, dominant wolf. He was seeing something else, something deeper, something in her silent flight, her quiet survival. It was the first time anyone had ever validated her, not for what she could be, but for what she was. The warmth that spread through her was not from the fire, but from the unexpected recognition, the quiet acceptance emanating from him. It was a dangerous warmth, a lure to a connection she had long sworn off. Suddenly, the air outside the cave grew colder, heavy with a new scent, faint but unmistakable, blood, and beneath it, a desperate, frantic energy, an animal terror. The howl came again, closer still, a ragged, tortured shriek that ended abruptly in a choked gasp. Mark froze, the knife still in his hand, his eyes now narrowed, focused on the cave mouth. His entire posture shifted, becoming coiled, predatory, yet without aggression directed at her. It was pure instinctual readiness. His earlier words about desperation echoed in Ira's mind. This was not just a lost rogue. This was something else. He rose fluidly, his movements silent despite his size. He moved to the very edge of the cave, his hand brushing against the rough stone of the entrance. His gaze swept the darkness, assessing, listening. The air hummed with tension, a palpable fear that pressed down on Ira, making her breath catch. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Devoid of his usual calm, infused with an urgent authority she hadn't heard before. It wasn't a request. It was an order, primal and absolute. But it wasn't possessive. It was protective. He didn't wait for a response. He stepped out of the cave, vanishing into the impenetrable darkness of the forest, leaving Ira alone with the flickering firelight, the lingering scent of his presence, and the terrifying echo of that last tortured cry. She heard the soft crunch of leaves under his powerful stride, for only a moment before silence descended, a profound, heavy quiet broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. She was alone, completely vulnerable, yet a strange, fierce resolve ignited within her. He had seen her strength, and now, for the first time, she felt it. A primal surge of protectiveness, not for herself, but for the enigmatic alpha who had offered her unasked freedom. She wanted him to return. She needed him too. And in that moment of profound vulnerability and unexpected longing, she heard it again, a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible. A whisper in the wind, a soft, high-pitched plea that seemed to draw her towards the mouth of the cave. It was a child's cry, the child's cry, thin and piercing, cut through the vast, cold silence of the forest like a shard of ice. It was unmistakable, full of raw terror and desperate need, a sound that twisted something deep within Ira's chest. Marek's command, "Stay here," echoed in her mind, a stark warning, but it was drowned out by the primal instinct that surged through her, an urge to protect, to respond to vulnerability, an impulse she hadn't realized still existed within her broken self. Her heart, already a frantic drum, now beat with a different kind of urgency, a defiant rhythm. She pushed herself up, wincing as her sprained ankle protested, but the pain was a distant echo compared to the potent pull of that cry. The thought of Marek facing an unknown danger alone, and now a child's life hanging in the balance, propelled her forward. She hobbled to the mouth of the cave, peering out into the impenetrable darkness. The moon had all but vanished, swallowed by a thick canopy of clouds, leaving the forest cloaked in an inky blackness. She could only see the immediate shapes of ancient trees, their branches skeletal fingers against a bruised sky. The scent of blood was stronger now, coppery and sharp, mingling with the earthy tang of damp leaves and something else, the acrid smell of fear, pungent and overwhelming. Her suppressed wolf, that quiet, whimpering thing, stirred with a new, frantic energy, a low growl rumbling in her chest, a sound she hadn't made in years. It was a faint, almost silent snarl, but it was there, a desperate flicker of her true nature asserting itself. "Hello," she called out, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the pounding of her blood in her ears. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Then a whimper, closer now, followed by a muffled sob. It was coming from behind a thick cluster of ancient moss-covered boulders, just beyond the cave's protective shadow. Ignoring the throbbing protest of her ankle, and the cold dread creeping up her spine, Ira limped forward, her hands outstretched, feeling her way through the darkness. Every nerve ending was alight, her senses overwhelmed by the raw immediacy of the situation. This wasn't about Calder, or her past, or her perceived failures. This was about a fragile life in peril. She rounded the boulders, and the faint moonlight, momentarily piercing through a gap in the clouds, illuminated a horrific scene. A small, ragged form huddled against a tree trunk, trembling violently. It was a child, no older than 5 or 6, wrapped in a tattered cloak, its face streaked with dirt and tears. Beside it, sprawled awkwardly on the forest floor, was the source of the blood, a small, dark-furred wolf, motionless, its eyes glazed, a deep wound marring its flank. The rogue. It was the same one whose cries had pierced the night, now silent and still. But its stillness wasn't peaceful. Its body was contorted, its fur matted, as if it had been struck down with immense force. The child looked up, its wide, terrified eyes meeting hers. They were luminous, a startling, vivid green that seemed to glow in the dim light. A gasp escaped Ira's lips. The child was a shifter, its irises betraying its true nature, glowing faintly like embers. But it was so small, so vulnerable. "Mama," the child whimpered, its voice thin, barely audible, reaching out a small, trembling hand. Ira knelt, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle, her heart aching with a profound, almost visceral empathy. She had been taught that such rogues were dangerous, that they were lost to their animal nature, but this was a child, a lost, terrified child, clinging to its dying wolf. She reached out, her hand hesitant, then firm, gently taking the child's small, cold fingers. The skin was rough, calloused, but fragile. "It's okay," Ira murmured, her voice thick with emotion, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "You're safe now." She pulled the child closer, wrapping her arms around its small, shivering frame. The child burrowed into her, its tiny body trembling uncontrollably, its scent a mix of pine, fear, and something sweet, like wildflowers. It was a scent that resonated with her own quiet wolf, pulling at something deep and ancient within her. Just then, a presence slammed into the clearing like a physical force. Marek. He emerged from the shadows, a formidable figure, his eyes blazing amber, his muscles coiled, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. His gaze swept the scene, taking in the still body of the rogue wolf, the terrified child, and Ira, cradling it in her arms. A flash of raw, untamed fury crossed his features, quickly masked by a fierce protectiveness that radiated from him in waves. He had clearly heard the child's cry and followed the scent of blood. His eyes locked with Ira's, and for a moment, the air crackled with unspoken tension. He had commanded her to stay. She had defied him, but in her eyes, he saw not rebellion, but a profound compassion, a fierce, quiet strength that belied her past and her own self-doubt. He saw the genuine, uncalculated instinct that had driven her out. His gaze softened imperceptibly, the primal growl in his chest quieting to a low rumble. He didn't admonish her. He didn't need to. The silent understanding that passed between them was more potent than any words. He knew why she had disobeyed. And in that moment, something shifted between them. A silent acknowledgement of a deeper connection, a shared humanity, and perhaps something more primal, that transcended Alpha and Omega, master and supplicant. Marek knelt beside them, his large hand reaching out, not for Ira, but for the child. His touch was hesitant, surprisingly gentle, as he brushed a stray lock of hair from its face. The child flinched, then leaned into his touch, its fear momentarily eclipsed by an innocent need for comfort. "What is your name, little one?" Marek asked, his voice a deep, soothing murmur, utterly different from the commanding tone he had used moments earlier. The child looked up at him, its green eyes wide. "Rowan," it whispered, clutching Ira's tunic. "And that was my mama, the wolf." Tears welled up in its eyes again, fresh and bright. Ira gasped softly. The rogue wolf was Rowan's mother. The raw anguish in the child's voice twisted her heart. This wasn't just a lost rogue. It was a parent trying to protect its young, driven to desperation by forces unknown. Marek's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. He carefully examined the dead wolf, his fingers tracing the fatal wound. "She fought hard," he murmured, a note of respect in his voice. "Fought to protect you." His gaze scanned the surrounding trees, his senses on high alert, searching for any lingering presence. any sign of what could have inflicted such a wound. The forest, which had been silent before, now seemed to hold its breath. He turned back to Ira and Rowan. "We cannot stay here," he stated, his voice firm, his protectiveness now encompassing both of them. He carefully scooped Rowan into his large arms, holding the child against his broad chest. Rowan, after a brief moment of hesitation, nestled into him, small and fragile against his immense strength. Ira pushed herself up, her ankle throbbing fiercely, but she focused on the child, on Marek, on this strange, new constellation of three. She felt a fierce, unexpected bond to this small, terrified shifter, a yearning to protect it, to nurture it, a yearning she had thought utterly extinguished within her. Marek met her gaze, his amber eyes deep with an unreadable emotion. "You came out," he observed, his tone not accusatory, but rather a simple statement of fact, tinged with something akin to wonder. He saw not defiance, but courage. "I heard the cry," Ira responded, her voice steady, no longer a whisper. "I couldn't leave it." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Marek's lips, a rare, breathtaking sight that softened the rugged lines of his face. It was a smile of understanding, of profound recognition. "No," he agreed, his gaze sweeping over her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "You couldn't." He turned, leading the way back towards the cave, Rowan tucked securely in his arms. Ira followed, limping but determined, her gaze fixed on the powerful figure before her. She was no longer just running from something, she was moving towards something, towards an alpha who saw not her brokenness, but her inherent strength, towards a child who needed her, towards a future she hadn't dared to dream of. As they neared the cave, a subtle shift occurred in the air. The faint silvery luminescence she had seen earlier on Marek's skin, and near his hand, reappeared. This time, it wasn't just on him. As Marek carried Rowan, a faint ethereal glow seemed to emanate from the child's small hand, where it rested against Marek's chest. And then, impossibly, a similar faint glow pulsed from Ira's own hand, where she had held Rowan moments before, a warm, tingling sensation spreading through her fingers, as if an ancient thread had been awakened, connecting all three of them in a web of shimmering, silent magic. This was not just fate. This was something deeper, something far more profound, something that would bind them in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The weight of unasked freedom had been replaced by the heavy, wondrous weight of an unexpected, undeniable bond. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that whatever had killed Rowan's mother was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and now it knew they were here. The faint silvery pulse that connected them, Ira, Marek, and the small, trembling Rowan, was a silent hum beneath the frantic beat of Ira's heart. It shimmered, ethereal and profound, a fragile thread spun from shared fear and unexpected protection. As Marek carried Rowan, the child's small hand, still glowing faintly, rested against his chest, mirroring the subtle warmth that now emanated from Ira's own fingers. This was no mere coincidence, no trick of the moonlight. This was something ancient, something that resonated with the primordial wilderness, and it bound them in a way that defied logic, defying everything Ira had ever known about pack, bond, and self. Marek re-entered the cave, his eyes, amber and piercing, sweeping its interior before settling on the furs by the fire. He moved with a quiet urgency, placing Rowan gently down. The child, exhausted by terror and grief, curled into a tight ball, its vibrant green eyes wide with unshed tears, its small body still shaking. Marek knelt beside it, his large hand resting lightly on Rowan's back, a gesture of silent comfort. His presence, usually a sentinel's quiet strength, now pulsed with a fierce, controlled energy, his scent sharpened by vigilance. The scent of blood from outside still clung to the air, a grim reminder of the threat that had claimed Rowan's mother and now potentially stalked them. Ira limped closer, her ankle protesting with every step, but her focus was entirely on the child. Her own wolf, that long dormant presence, stirred within her, a low protective growl rumbling in her chest, a phantom echo of the rogue mother's last stand. She knelt opposite Marek, her eyes meeting his across Rowan's small form. In his gaze, she saw a reflection of her own burgeoning protectiveness, a shared, unspoken vow. The air between them, thick with tension and the lingering scent of danger, also vibrated with a fragile, nascent understanding. "He's cold," Ira murmured, her voice raw. She reached for a thick, woven blanket near the furs, gently wrapping it around Rowan. The child immediately burrowed deeper, clinging to the warmth, its small body slowly beginning to relax. Marek nodded, his gaze unwavering as he watched Ira tend to Rowan. A subtle shift occurred in his features, a softening around his rugged eyes, as if he was witnessing something profound, something he hadn't expected. He had commanded her to stay, yet she had defied him, not out of rebellion, but out of an instinct to protect. An instinct that now resonated with his own. He saw not a broken Omega, but a fierce, quiet guardian. The rhythmic crackle of the fire filled the silence, a counterpoint to the wild whispers of the forest outside. Ira looked from Rowan's tear-streaked face to Marek's stoic profile. What happened out there?" she asked, her voice hushed. To his mother, Marek's jaw tightened. He reached for a chunk of dried meat, tearing off a piece and offering it to Rowan, who shook its head, whimpering softly. He laid the meat beside the child, then turned his full attention to Ira. "She was struck down," he said, his voice grave. "Not by a beast of the forest. The wound, it was too precise, too clean for an animal, yet too brutal for a human blade." He paused, his amber eyes narrowing, scanning the shadows beyond the cave mouth. "There are hunters in these woods, Ira. Not the kind who seek game for sustenance." A cold dread seeped into Ira's bones. Hunters. Not the common kind, but those who sought shifters, who preyed on the vulnerable, who saw their kind as trophies or threats. Calder's pack had warned her of them, but she had always assumed her perceived insignificance would protect her. Now, with Rowan and with Marek, she was irrevocably drawn into a deeper, far more dangerous conflict. Why would they target a rogue wolf? She pressed, her mind racing. And a child? Marek's gaze was distant, as if peering into unseen depths. "Rogues often carry old blood," he explained, his voice a low rumble. "Ancient lines, untainted by the politics of the established packs. And children. Children are always a prize, for their potential, for their power." He glanced at Rowan, a flicker of something ancient and burdened in his eyes, especially those with green eyes, and a certain luminescence. Ira's breath hitched, the glowing thread. The strange silvery light that had connected them all. It wasn't just her imagination. Marek had seen it too, and he understood its significance, a significance that filled her with both wonder and terror. Was Rowan special? Was Marek special? And what did it mean that she, the wolfless Omega, was now connected to them? "The glow," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saw it, on your hand, on Rowan. And I felt it in mine." She held up her trembling hand, her fingers still tingling faintly. Marek's eyes, which had been fixed on the forest, now snapped to her hand, then to her face. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed his features, followed by a deeper, more profound intensity. He reached out, his large, scarred hand hovering inches from hers. His scent, that intoxicating mix of earth and wild power, enveloped her, drawing her closer, a primal magnetism she couldn't fight. "You saw it," he stated, his voice a low, rough whisper, filled with an ancient awe. "And you felt it." He gently, hesitantly, took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. The contact was electric, a surge of warmth and energy that coursed through her veins, radiating from her fingertips to the very core of her being. The faint glow intensified, a soft silver light pulsing visibly around their joined hands, mirroring the faint luminescence still visible on Rowan's small hand. It was beautiful, terrifying, and profoundly intimate. What is this?" Ira asked, her voice breathless, her gaze locked with his. His touch was not possessive, not demanding, but deeply, irrevocably connecting. It was a language spoken not through words, but through ancient magic, through the very essence of their beings. Marek's thumb stroked the back of her hand, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. His amber eyes, usually so stoic, were now alight with a fierce, vulnerable intensity. "It is the life force, Ira," he murmured, his gaze dropping to their joined hands, then back to her eyes. "The ancient thread that binds us to the earth, to each other. It is strongest in those untouched by the rigidities of civilization, in the wild ones, the old blood." His gaze flickered to Rowan, then back to her, a profound realization dawning in their depths. "And it seems in you." His words, and the raw, undeniable connection that flowed between their joined hands, shattered the last remnants of her self-doubt. In you, he saw it. He felt it. Her wolf, silent for so long, now pulsed with a faint, insistent energy, not a roar, but a deep, resonant hum of recognition. She wasn't broken, she was simply different. And he, this formidable ancient alpha, saw it as a strength, not a flaw. Rowan stirred, whimpering softly in its sleep. Marek gently released Ira's hand, the silvery light fading, though the warmth and the connection lingered, a powerful afterglow. He moved to Rowan, checking the child, ensuring its warmth and safety. His concern for the child was palpable, a deep, resonant paternal instinct that tore at Ira's heart in a way she hadn't expected. "We will stay here for tonight," Marek said, his voice firm, his gaze sweeping the cave, assessing its defenses. "But at dawn, we move, further into the wild, where the old paths are hidden." He turned to Ira, his amber eyes serious. "The hunters will be drawn by the scent of blood. They will follow." Ira nodded, her own resolve hardening. She was no longer just an exile, a broken omega. She was part of something larger now, connected by an invisible thread, bound by an ancient magic. She had a purpose, a child to protect, a terrifying, enigmatic alpha to understand. As Marek extinguished the fire, plunging the cave into near darkness, a low, guttural snarl echoed from deep within the forest, closer than before. It was not the mournful cry of a lost rogue, but a predatory sound, cold and calculating. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and something else, a metallic tang that spoke of steel and blood, and a chilling, unfamiliar scent that raised the hackles on Ira's neck. The hunters were here, and they were not just after lost rogues. They were after something more, something Marek was protecting. And now she was part of that protection, a silent, defiant challenge to the forces that sought to extinguish the ancient light. The low, guttural snarl that pierced the pre-dawn darkness was unlike any sound Ira had ever heard. It wasn't the howl of a lost wolf, nor the hungry cry of a predator, but something colder, more calculating, infused with an ancient malevolence that raised the hackles on her neck. It spoke of intellect twisted by cruelty, of a pursuit driven by something far more sinister than mere survival. The cave, which had felt like a sanctuary moments ago, now seemed a fragile shell, its thin walls no match for the forces converging outside. Marek moved with a silent, terrifying grace, extinguishing the last embers of the fire with a swift sweep of his foot. The sudden plunge into absolute darkness was disorienting, amplifying her other senses. The cold scent of steel and blood, laced with a chilling, unfamiliar musk, pressed in on them, seeping through the cave mouth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. Rowan, nestled deep in the furs, whimpered softly, stirring from its uneasy sleep. "They're here," Marek rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that vibrated through the very stones of the cave. It was a statement of grim certainty, devoid of panic. He didn't turn to her, his gaze fixed on the unseen world beyond. His body, immense and powerful, was coiled with a lethal readiness, every muscle tensed, every nerve alight. His scent, usually a grounding force, now sharpened, carrying the tang of ozone and raw, untamed power. Ira scrambled to her feet, her sprained ankle screaming in protest, but she ignored the pain. Her own wolf, that quiet, suppressed entity, now stirred with a frantic urgency, a low growl echoing faintly in her chest. She had spent her life feeling inadequate, wolfless, but in this moment of extreme danger, something primal and fierce awakened within her, a desperate need to protect the small, vulnerable child, and to stand by the enigmatic alpha who had shown her a different kind of freedom. Marek turned, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, cutting through the gloom with an almost luminous intensity. He reached for Rowan, scooping the child into his arms with a swift, practiced motion. Rowan, startled, let out a small cry, immediately muffled as Mark drew it close to his chest. "We go," he commanded, his gaze sweeping over Ira, demanding her immediate compliance, not as an order of dominance, but as a shared imperative for survival. He moved towards the back of the cave, towards a section of the wall Ira hadn't noticed before. With a grunt, he pulled aside a cleverly disguised curtain of thick moss and carefully stacked stones, revealing a narrow, dark fissure. It was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, a hidden passage known only to him. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice low, before he disappeared into the black opening. Rowan clutched securely in one arm. Ira hesitated for only a fraction of a second. The thought of the hunters, their chilling scent, their predatory snarl, spurred her forward. She squeezed through the narrow passage, the rough stones scraping against her clothes, her injured ankle twisting awkwardly. The air in the tunnel was cold and damp, smelling of earth and ancient rock. She could hear Marek's quiet, rhythmic breathing ahead of her, a steady anchor in the suffocating darkness. They moved through the subterranean passage, a winding, claustrophobic labyrinth that seemed to stretch endlessly. Ira could feel the earth pressing in on all sides, the weight of the mountain above them. Her heart pounded, a frantic rhythm that echoed in the confined space. She stumbled, her hands scraping against the rough rock, but she pushed on, driven by the urgency of the moment. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened, and a faint glimmer of moonlight appeared ahead. Marek emerged into a small hidden gully, densely overgrown with thorny bushes and low-hanging branches. The air here was sharp with frost, but the scent of the hunters, though still present, was fainter, diffused by the winding earth. "This way," Marek whispered, not looking back, his voice a low rumble. He moved with a silent, swift precision, his massive frame weaving through the tangled undergrowth as if he were part of it. He was a shadow moving through shadows, a master of this ancient, untamed world. Ira followed, struggling to keep pace, her sprained ankle protesting with every jarring step. The thorns snagged at her clothes, tearing at her skin, but she barely registered the pain. Her focus was entirely on Marek's retreating form, on the small bundled shape of Rowan in his arms. The silvery pulse, which had connected them in the cave, was now a faint internal hum within her, a quiet strength that seemed to guide her steps, a primal compass pointing her toward safety. Suddenly, Marek froze. He held up a hand, a silent command for her to stop. His head tilted, listening. The forest was eerily silent, the usual rustling of leaves and chirping of insects absent. Only the soft whisper of the wind through the pines broke the oppressive quiet. Then a twig snapped in the distance, followed by the faint rhythmic crunch of heavy boots on frozen earth. They were close, too close. Marek pressed himself against the rough bark of a towering spruce, pulling Rowan closer, his body shielding the child entirely. He gestured for Ira to do the same, to flatten herself against the tree trunk beside him. She obeyed instantly, her breath catching in her throat, her muscles trembling with suppressed fear. She could feel the warmth radiating from Marek's immense form, a powerful protective heat that enveloped her, even through the layers of her worn clothes. His scent, wild and earthy, was a potent anchor in the rising tide of panic. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear, sending a jolt of electric awareness through her. "Stay silent," he whispered, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through her. "Breathe with the forest." Her heart thundered, but she forced herself to slow her breathing, to listen, to meld with the ancient stillness of the trees. The scent of steel and blood grew stronger, closer, now mingled with the acrid tang of human sweat and something else, something metallic and unnatural, like cold iron. These were not mere hunters. These were skilled trackers, silent and relentless. She risked a glance at Marek. His profile was etched with grim determination, his amber eyes narrowed, scanning the gloom. The faint silvery luminescence she had seen earlier was now more pronounced beneath his skin, pulsing subtly along the scar on his brow and around the edges of his powerful hands. It was a silent testament to his profound otherness, his ancient power. And she realized with a chilling certainty that this glow was not just a symbol of connection, but perhaps a beacon, a mark that the hunters sought. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the forest, moving with a predatory grace. It was a man, cloaked in dark, heavy fabric, his face obscured by a hood. He carried a long, gleaming blade at his hip, and in his hand a strange, intricate device that glowed with a faint blue light. He paused, his head turning slowly, as if sniffing the air, his movements unnervingly silent. He was looking for something, or someone. Ira held her breath, pressing herself closer to Marek, her hand instinctively reaching out, her fingers brushing against the rough fabric of his tunic. The physical contact was a lifeline, a silent plea for protection, a desperate offering of her own fragile presence. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she felt a subtle shift in his posture, a slight lean into her, a silent acknowledgement of her touch, her fear, her presence. The hunter moved past them, agonizingly close, his heavy boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. Ira could feel the cold emanating from him, a palpable aura of darkness and intent. Her wolf whimpered, deep within her, a terrified protest against the unnatural chill. Just as he seemed about to disappear, he paused, his head snapping back. He raised the glowing blue device, its light sweeping over the very spot where they were hidden. For a terrifying second, the blue light illuminated a patch of moss near Marek's boot, and Ira saw it. A faint iridescent shimmer, a residual trace of the silvery light that emanated from Marek and Rowan. The hunter's head snapped towards their hiding place. He had seen something, he knew. Marek moved, not to attack, but to distract. With a silent burst of speed, he launched himself in the opposite direction, away from the hunter, away from Ira and Rowan. A low growl, fierce and challenging, ripped from his throat, drawing the hunter's attention, pulling him away. "Go!" Marek commanded, his voice a thunderous roar that echoed through the forest. A primal challenge hurled at the hunter. "Hide, Rowan! Run!" Ira watched him go, her heart tearing. He was deliberately drawing the danger away from them, sacrificing himself to buy them time. The hunter, startled but quickly recovering, let out a harsh cry and plunged into the forest, pursuing Marek's powerful form. The sounds of their crashing through the undergrowth faded quickly, leaving Ira alone with the terrified, whimpering child in her arms. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. There was no time for despair. Marek had given her a command, and this time she would obey. Not out of submission, but out of a fierce, desperate loyalty. She clutched Rowan tightly, feeling the faint silver pulse emanating from the child and from her own hand. It was a silent promise, a vow. She would protect this child. She would honor Marek's sacrifice. With a renewed surge of adrenaline, Ira turned and plunged deeper into the dark, tangled forest, her sprained ankle screaming, but her resolve unyielding. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving, had to hide Rowan, had to survive. The woods swallowed her, the chilling scent of the hunters still lingering, a cold promise of pursuit. She was no longer running from her past. She was running for her future, and for the fragile lives now entrusted to her care. And as she ran, a new, terrifying sound emerged from the depths of the forest, a sound that froze her blood. Not the snarl of a wolf, but a metallic clang followed by a grunt of pain, a sound that spoke of a struggle far more brutal than she could imagine. It was Marek, and he was in grave danger. The metallic clang, followed by Marek's guttural grunt of pain, ripped through the silence of the forest like a physical blow to Ira's chest. It was a sound that instantly transformed her fear into a searing agony, a desperate certainty that he was fighting, perhaps dying, for them. His command, "Hide, Rowan, run!" echoed in her ears, a thunderous roar that now mingled with the frantic pounding of her own blood. She clutched Rowan tighter, the child's small, shivering body a fragile weight in her arms, its faint silvery glow a beacon in the encroaching darkness of her despair. Her sprained ankle screamed with every step, a searing pain that shot up her leg, but she pushed through it, fueled by a primal urgency. She plunged deeper into the tangled undergrowth, ignoring the thorns that tore at her clothes and pricked her skin. The forest was a suffocating labyrinth, each shadow a potential threat, each rustle of leaves a phantom hunter. The chilling scent of cold iron, of human intent, still lingered in the air, a grim reminder that they were not yet safe. Rowan whimpered, burying its face against Ira's shoulder, its small hand clutching her tunic with surprising strength. The child's fear was a tangible thing, a cold knot in Aira's stomach, but it also anchored her, giving her a purpose beyond mere survival. She had to protect this child, no matter the cost. Marek had trusted her with this precious life, and she would not fail him. But the sounds of his struggle, faint and distant now, kept replaying in her mind. Another metallic clang, a muffled crash, then a prolonged, agonizing silence. Had he fallen? Was he hurt? The thought sent a jolt of icy dread through her. He had offered her freedom, shelter, and most profoundly recognition of a strength she hadn't known she possessed. He had seen her, truly seen her, not as a broken Omega, but as something more. And now he was facing unimaginable danger alone, because of her, because of Rowan. Guilt, sharp and bitter, clawed at her throat. She found a small, sheltered hollow beneath the sprawling roots of an ancient oak, its massive trunk offering a measure of concealment. Gently, she lowered Rowan into the hollow, pulling a thick layer of dried leaves and moss over the child, leaving just enough space for it to breathe. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice hoarse, her fingers brushing the child's tear-streaked cheek. "Don't make a sound, little one. I'll be back." Rowan's vivid green eyes, luminous in the dim light, met hers, filled with a profound, innocent trust that tore at her heart. The faint silvery glow pulsed from the child's hand, mirroring the warmth in Ira's own. It was a silent promise, a bond forged in fear and hope. Leaving Rowan was the hardest thing she had ever done, each step away a wrenching pull. But she couldn't just run. She couldn't leave Marek to face those hunters alone. The man who had seen her truth, who had offered her unasked freedom, who had ignited a spark of hope in her desolate heart. She couldn't abandon him. The idea was unthinkable, a betrayal of a bond more profound than any she had ever known. Her wolf, long silent and subdued, now surged within her, not with a roar, but with a quiet, fierce determination. It was a silent hunter, a tracker, attuned to the subtle currents of the forest. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting the scents guide her. The metallic tang of cold iron, the acrid scent of human sweat, and beneath it all, the raw, earthy musk of Marek, now tinged with the sharp, coppery smell of his blood. The scent was a desperate thread, drawing her back towards the danger. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, to protect herself. But a powerful, undeniable force pulled her forward. It wasn't just loyalty or gratitude. It was something deeper, something primal and consuming. In his silence, in his unwavering acceptance, Marek had awakened a part of her she thought was dead. He had seen her, truly seen her, and in doing so had made her feel seen, for the first time in her life. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about him. She moved with a newfound stealth, her movements quiet despite her injured ankle. Her senses, sharpened by desperation, picked up every subtle sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the faint, uneven breathing of men. The forest, once a place of terrifying solitude, now felt like a living, breathing entity, a silent ally in her desperate quest. The path grew steeper, leading her towards a rocky clearing she remembered passing earlier. The scent of Marek's blood grew stronger, thick and cloying in the cold night air, mixing with the metallic tang of cold iron. Her heart pounded, a desperate drum against her ribs. She was close, too close. She peered through a thick screen of thorny bushes, her breath catching in her throat. The scene before her was a tableau of brutal violence. Marek, immense and powerful, was cornered against a sheer rock face, his back to the stone. Two hunters, cloaked figures with grim, unyielding faces, pressed in on him. One wielded a long, barbed spear, its tip glinting cruelly in the faint moonlight. The other held the glowing blue device, its light sweeping over Marek, clearly weakening him, draining his ancient power. His movements were slower, heavier, his usual fluid grace replaced by a desperate, brute force. Blood, dark and glistening, stained his tunic, a deep gash visible on his shoulder. His amber eyes, usually so fierce, were now clouded with pain, though his expression remained a mask of grim defiance. He was fighting, but he was fading. The silvery luminescence beneath his skin, which had pulsed with such quiet power, was now flickering erratically, a dying ember. The ancient blood runs deep in this one of the hunters snarled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. But the iron will break him. The device will drain him. Ira felt a cold fury ignite within her, a blazing inferno that consumed her fear. They were draining him, stealing his life force. The very essence of his ancient power, the image of the glowing thread, the connection between them flared in her mind, hot and urgent. It wasn't just a symbolic bond. It was real. And they were severing it, severing him. Her gaze fell to the ground, to a heavy, jagged rock half buried in the earth. Her wolf, silent no longer, let out a low, feral growl, a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated rage that vibrated through her bones. She wasn't wolfless, she wasn't broken. She was a survivor, a protector, and in this moment she would fight. For Marek, for Rowan, for the fragile hope he had ignited within her. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Ira grabbed the jagged rock, its rough surface biting into her palm. She emerged from the bushes, a silent, furious blur, her injured ankle forgotten, her movements fueled by a primal force she hadn't known she possessed. The hunters, focused on their powerful prey, didn't see her, didn't sense her. They were too preoccupied with Marek's formidable resistance. She aimed for the hunter holding the glowing device, the source of Marek's weakness. With a guttural cry, raw and untamed, she slammed the rock into the back of his head. The impact was sickening, a dull thud that echoed in the clearing. The hunter crumpled, the device clattering to the ground, its blue light flickering and dying. The other hunter, startled, spun around, his eyes wide with surprise, his spear momentarily forgotten. He let out a furious snarl, his gaze falling on Ira, then on the fallen device. He saw not a weak Omega, but a fierce, unexpected threat. "You!" he snarled, raising his spear, its barbed tip aimed directly at her chest. But Marek had seen her. His amber eyes, though still clouded with pain, flared with a sudden, fierce light, a surge of renewed power. The silvery luminescence beneath his skin pulsed, strong and vibrant, as if her presence, her defiant act, had reawakened something ancient within him. With a roar that shook the very trees, a primal sound of raw, untamed power, he lunged. He moved with a speed and ferocity that defied his injuries, slamming into the remaining hunter, tearing the spear from his grasp. The hunter cried out, a sound of terror and pain, as Marek's powerful hands closed around his throat. A chilling silence descended, broken only by Marek's ragged breathing and the faint whimpers of the hunter. Ira stood frozen, the jagged rock still clutched in her hand, watching the raw, brutal display of his ancient power. He was an alpha king, not just of a pack, but of the wild itself, a force of nature unleashed. His fury was terrifying, but it was also beautiful, a manifestation of the primal bond that now connected them. His gaze, wild and untamed, met hers across the clearing. In his eyes, she saw not just relief, but a profound gratitude, a fierce, protective love that took her breath away. He had seen her fight, he had seen her strength. And in that moment, as the last hunter's struggles faded into silence, Ira knew, with a certainty that resonated through her very soul, that she was no longer alone, no longer broken. She was finally, irrevocably, home. But the danger wasn't truly over. The fallen hunter still lay motionless, and the other could revive. And the world outside this clearing, the world they had fled, still pulsed with threats. The price of this freedom, this bond, might yet be higher than she could ever imagine. The clearing was silent, save for the ragged exhalations of Marek and the soft rustle of leaves in the cold pre-dawn air. The last hunter lay motionless, a crumpled heap against the ancient stones, while the other, the one Ira had struck, stirred with a groan, his eyes fluttering open in a daze. Marek, his hand still clenched, released his grip, his gaze, wild and untamed moments ago, softening as it met Ira's. The fury had receded, replaced by a profound, almost vulnerable relief that mirrored her own. Blood still darkened his shoulder, but the silvery luminescence beneath his skin pulsed with a renewed, vibrant intensity, a testament to his ancient power reasserting itself, bolstered by her defiant intervention. Ira dropped the jagged rock, its weight suddenly unbearable. Her legs trembled, threatening to give out, but she stood firm, her gaze locked with Marek's. The air crackled between them, thick with adrenaline, fear, and an undeniable primal recognition. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a fragile Omega, but as a fierce warrior, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. And in his eyes, a depth of emotion she hadn't dared to hope for shone through, gratitude, admiration, and a fierce, possessive love that resonated to the deepest core of her being. He took a step towards her, then another, closing the distance until he stood before her, immense and powerful, yet radiating a gentle reverence. His large hand reached out, not to claim, but to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a feather-light touch. A jolt, electric and intoxicating, shot through her, melting the last vestiges of her fear. His scent, a heady mix of pine, earth, and his own unique, musky warmth, enveloped her, drawing her closer, a silent invitation to a bond that transcended words. "You came back," he murmured, his voice a low, rough whisper, thick with emotion. "You fought." Ira leaned into his touch, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You protected us," she countered, her voice raw, thick with her own burgeoning feelings. "You sacrificed." His gaze, molten amber, searched hers, deep and unwavering. "We are bound," he stated, his voice now a solemn vow, echoing the silent, shimmering thread that had pulsed between them. By choice, by instinct, by the ancient light. As he spoke, the faint silvery luminescence flared around their faces, a beautiful, ethereal glow that seemed to bless their unspoken communion. He didn't need to say more. She understood. This was not a bond of duty or ownership or societal expectation. This was a bond forged in fire and blood, in shared vulnerability and defiant courage. It was a choice, freely given and fiercely taken. Suddenly, a small, sleepy whimper broke the spell. Rowan. Marek and Ira turned simultaneously, their gazes drawn towards the hollow where Ira had hidden the child. The second hunter, regaining consciousness, was stirring, his eyes still dazed, but his hand reaching for a discarded blade. Marek's demeanor shifted instantly, his eyes hardening, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But before he could move, Ira reached out, placing a hand on his arm, her gaze firm. "No," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. "They don't deserve your blood. This is not our fight. Not this way. Not anymore." He looked at her, then at the groaning hunter, then back to her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Her words resonated with an ancient wisdom, a strength that transcended brute force. He understood. His purpose was protection, not vengeance. Instead of violence, Marek let out a low, guttural roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated alpha power that vibrated through the very roots of the trees, a primal warning that shook the ground. The sound was not a challenge, but a declaration of boundaries. The recovering hunter froze, his eyes wide with terror, the raw power of Marek's roar stripping him of all fight. He scrambled backwards, whimpering, then, grabbing his weapon, he stumbled away, dragging the unconscious body of his companion, vanishing into the forest. They would not return, not here. Marek watched them go, then turned back to Ira, a profound respect etched on his rugged face. "You chose a different path," he murmured, his voice filled with awe. "A stronger one." Together they walked to the hollow where Rowan was hidden. Ira gently uncovered the child, who immediately reached for them, its small hands grasping their clothes, its vivid green eyes still wide, but now filled with a fragile hope. The faint silvery light pulsed from Rowan's hands, and as Ira and Marek reached for the child, the glow intensified, weaving around their joined hands, a silent, powerful affirmation of their new, unconventional family. They returned to the hidden cave as dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of rose and gold. Marek built a new fire, its warmth chasing away the night's chill. Ira tended to Marek's wound, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned and bound it with fresh herbs he produced from a hidden pouch. Her ankle, though still bruised, felt stronger, the pain dulled by the potent surge of connection and purpose. Later, as Rowan slept soundly between them, nestled deep in the furs, Ira leaned against Marek's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arm, strong and comforting, was wrapped around her, pulling her close. His scent, now a pure, intoxicating blend of earth, pine, and safety, filled her senses, a balm to her long-wounded soul. Calder's words. "They held me captive for so long," Ira whispered, her voice soft, vulnerable, "that I was barren, wolfless, a broken omega." Marek's hand stroked her hair, a slow, rhythmic motion that sent shivers of contentment through her. "Words are chains only if you believe them, little one," he rumbled, his voice a deep, resonant hum against her ear. "Your wolf. It may not roar like others, but it is ancient. It is resilient. It chose freedom. It chose us. And your heart, Ira, is fertile ground for a love far deeper than any bloodline." His words, a profound validation, echoed the truth she had discovered in the wild silence of his territory. Her wolf, once a whimpering shadow, now felt present, quiet but strong, a vibrant, living part of her, resonating with the ancient power of Marek's own. She was not barren, she was not wolfless, she was whole, and the unique silvery glow that now pulsed faintly within her, connecting her to Marek and Rowan, was proof of a different kind of power, a deeper connection to the very essence of life and magic. Their lives in the ancient woods were not without challenge. The world outside, the world of packs and kingdoms, would continue its endless churn. The threat of hunters, though temporarily averted, still lingered like a distant storm cloud. But within their hidden sanctuary, within the profound, unasked freedom Marek offered, Ira found her home. She learned to track, to hunt, to read the subtle language of the forest. She learned to trust, not just Marek, but herself, discovering a strength and resilience she had never known she possessed. And Marek, the solitary alpha, scarred and burdened by ancient destinies, found his own redemption in her fierce, quiet spirit, and in the innocent joy of Rowan. He found a mate who truly saw him, who stood by him, not out of duty, but out of a profound, undeniable love. He found a family, not born of bloodline or political alliance, but forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. One evening, as the moon rose full and luminous above the ancient pines, casting a silvery glow over their clearing, Ira stood by the river, watching Marek teach Rowan how to skip stones. The child's laughter, bright and joyful, filled the air, a melody of hope. Marek looked up, his amber eyes finding hers, a silent question in their depths. Ira smiled, a full, radiant smile that reached her eyes, and walked towards them. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining, the familiar silvery luminescence pulsing softly between them, a silent promise. Rowan, sensing the connection, reached out, its small hand resting on theirs, completing the circle. In that moment, surrounded by the ancient whispers of the forest, beneath the watchful eye of the moon, Ira understood. She had fled a betrayal dressed as duty, found freedom without ownership, and in the silence discovered a love that asked nothing but gave everything. This was her truth. This was her home. This was her forever. The end. Chapter 8. Epilogue. The clearing was silent, save for the ragged exhalations of Marek and the soft rustle of leaves in the cold pre-dawn air. The last hunter lay motionless, a crumpled heap against the ancient stones, while the other, the one Ira had struck, stirred with a groan, his eyes fluttering open in a daze. Marek, his hand still clenched, released his grip, his gaze, wild and untamed moments ago, softening as it met Ira's. The fury had receded, replaced by a profound, almost vulnerable relief that mirrored her own. Blood still darkened his shoulder, a deep coppery stain on his worn tunic, but the silvery luminescence beneath his skin pulsed with a renewed, vibrant intensity, a testament to his ancient power reasserting itself, bolstered by her defiant intervention. Ira dropped the jagged rock, its weight suddenly unbearable. Her legs trembled, threatening to give out, but she stood firm, her gaze locked with Marek's. The air crackled between them, thick with adrenaline, fear, and an undeniable primal recognition. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a fragile omega, but as a fierce warrior, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. And in his eyes, a depth of emotion she hadn't dared to hope for shone through, gratitude, admiration, and a fierce, possessive love that resonated to the deepest core of her being. He took a step towards her, then another, closing the distance until he stood before her, immense and powerful, yet radiating a gentle reverence that disarmed her completely. His large hand reached out, not to claim, but to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a feather-light touch. A jolt, electric and intoxicating, shot through her, melting the last vestiges of her fear and shame. His scent, a heady mix of pine, damp earth, and his own unique musky warmth, enveloped her, drawing her closer, a silent invitation to a bond that transcended words. "You came back," he murmured, his voice a low, rough whisper, thick with emotion, tinged with a raw vulnerability she'd never expected from such a formidable alpha. "You fought." Ira leaned into his touch, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, but a faint, resilient smile touched her lips. "You protected us," she countered, her voice raw, thick with her own burgeoning feelings. "You sacrificed." His gaze, molten amber, searched hers, deep and unwavering. "We are bound," he stated, his voice now a solemn vow, echoing the silent, shimmering thread that had pulsed between them. "By choice, by instinct, by the ancient light." As he spoke, the faint silvery luminescence flared around their faces, a beautiful, ethereal glow that seemed to bless their unspoken communion, sealing a pact older than time itself. He didn't need to say more. She understood. This was not a bond of duty or ownership or societal expectation like the one she had fled. This was a bond forged in fire and blood, in shared vulnerability and defiant courage. It was a choice, freely given and fiercely taken, an undeniable connection that made her feel whole for the first time. Suddenly, a small sleepy whimper broke the spell. Rowan. Marek and Ira turned simultaneously, their gazes drawn towards the hollow where Ira had hidden the child. The second hunter, regaining consciousness, was stirring, his eyes still dazed, but his hand reaching for a discarded blade. The threat, though diminished, was not entirely gone. Marek's demeanor shifted instantly, his eyes hardening, a low growl rumbling in his chest, ready to defend. But before he could move, Ira reached out, placing a hand on his arm, her gaze firm, unwavering. "No," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, imbued with a quiet authority that surprised even herself. "They don't deserve your blood. This is not our fight. Not this way. Not anymore." He looked at her, then at the groaning hunter, then back to her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, followed by a profound understanding. Her words resonated with an ancient wisdom, a strength that transcended brute force. He understood. His purpose was protection, not vengeance. Instead of violence, Marek let out a low, guttural roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated alpha power that vibrated through the very roots of the trees, a primal warning that shook the ground. The sound was not a challenge, but a declaration of boundaries, a territorial claim that left no room for doubt. The recovering hunter froze, his eyes wide with terror, the raw power of Marek's roar stripping him of all fight. He scrambled backwards, whimpering, then, grabbing his weapon, he stumbled away, dragging the unconscious body of his companion, vanishing into the forest. They would not return, not here, not ever. Marek watched them go, then turned back to Ira, a profound respect etched on his rugged face. "You chose a different path," he murmured, his voice filled with awe. "A stronger one." Together they walked to the hollow where Rowan was hidden. Ira gently uncovered the child, who immediately reached for them, its small hands grasping their clothes, its vivid green eyes still wide, but now filled with a fragile hope that bloomed in the dawn light. The faint silvery light pulsed from Rowan's hands, and as Ira and Marek reached for the child, the glow intensified, weaving around their joined hands, a silent, powerful affirmation of their new, unconventional family. They returned to the hidden cave as dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of rose and gold. Marek built a new fire, its warmth chasing away the night's chill. Ira tended to Marek's wound, her hands surprisingly steady as she cleaned and bound it with fresh herbs he produced from a hidden pouch. Her ankle, though still bruised, felt stronger, the pain dulled by the potent surge of connection and purpose. With Rowan safe between them, a fragile new life, the weight of the night began to lift. Later, as Rowan slept soundly between them, nestled deep in the furs, Ira leaned against Marek's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His arm, strong and comforting, was wrapped around her, pulling her close. His scent, now a pure, intoxicating blend of earth, pine, and safety, filled her senses, a balm to her long-wounded soul. Calder's words, "They held me captive for so long," Ira whispered, her voice soft, vulnerable, the memory of her past humiliation still a faint echo. That I was barren, wolfless, a broken omega. Marek's hand stroked her hair, a slow, rhythmic motion that sent shivers of contentment through her. "Words are chains only if you believe them, little one," he rumbled, his voice a deep, resonant hum against her ear. "Your wolf. It may not roar like others, but it is ancient. It is resilient. It chose freedom. It chose us. And your heart, Ira, is fertile ground for a love far deeper than any bloodline." His words, a profound validation, echoed the truth she had discovered in the wild silence of his territory. Her wolf, once a whimpering shadow, now felt present, quiet but strong, a vibrant, living part of her, resonating with the ancient power of Marek's own. She was not barren, she was not wolfless, she was whole, and the unique silvery glow that now pulsed faintly within her, connecting her to Marek and Rowan, was proof of a different kind of power, a deeper connection to the very essence of life and magic itself. Their lives in the ancient woods were not without challenge. The world outside, the world of packs and kingdoms, would continue its endless churn. The threat of hunters, though temporarily averted, still lingered like a distant storm cloud on the horizon. But within their hidden sanctuary, within the profound, unasked freedom Marek offered, Ira found her home. She learned to track, to hunt, to read the subtle language of the forest. She learned to trust, not just Marek, but herself, discovering a strength and resilience she had never known she possessed. She embraced her quiet wolf, her unique connection, and her place in this wild, untamed world. And Marek, the solitary alpha, scarred and burdened by ancient destinies, found his own redemption in her fierce, quiet spirit, and in the innocent joy of Rowan. He found a mate who truly saw him, who stood by him. Not out of duty, but out of a profound, undeniable love that healed his own deep-seated solitude. He found a family, not born of bloodline or political alliance, but forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. One evening, as the moon rose full and luminous above the ancient pines, casting a silvery glow over their clearing, Ira stood by the river, watching Marek teach Rowan how to skip stones across the shimmering water. The child's laughter, bright and joyful, filled the air, a melody of hope, a promise of a future. Marek looked up, his amber eyes finding hers, a silent question in their depths, a silent invitation. Ira smiled, a full, radiant smile that reached her eyes, and walked towards them. She took his hand, their fingers intertwining, the familiar silvery luminescence pulsing softly between them, a silent promise of forever. Rowan, sensing the connection, reached out, its small hand resting on theirs, completing the circle, weaving their destinies together. In that moment, surrounded by the ancient whispers of the forest, beneath the watchful eye of the moon, Ira understood. She had fled a betrayal dressed as duty, found freedom without ownership, and in the terrifying, beautiful silence of the wild, discovered a love that asked nothing, but gave everything. This was her truth. This was her home. This was her forever.